This video tutorial I will explain HTTP response status codes. When a browser requests service from the web service, the response code will be given. Here you can see the list of HTTP status codes that might be written from the web service. The status codes are classified into 5 classes. First one is 100 series, which is informational. The request was received, continuing process. The second one is 200 series, which is successful. The request was successfully received, understood and accepted. The third one is 300 series, which is redirection. Further action needs to be taken in order to complete the request. Then fourth one is 400 series, which is client error. The request contains bad syntax or cannot be fulfilled. The fifth one is 500 series, which is server error. The server failed to fulfill a valid request. HTTP status codes are 3-digit response codes. These codes enable server to communicate with the users on the internet. When a request is placed to view the specific website or web page, these codes inform the user whether server is working or not. Status code is a response received by the server to a browser request. When you key a web address in the web browser sends request to the particular website server. The server then responds to the browser with a 3-digit HTTP status code. When a browser requests a service from the web server, an error might occur and the server might return the error code like 404 not found. And it is a common name to these errors as HTML error messages. But these messages are something called HTTP status messages. In fact, the server always returns a message for each and every request. The most common message is 200 OK. Click on More Tools, Developer Tools, and we will send request to google.com. And you have to select this network tab, and here you can see the request went to several URLs and corresponding status code. Here you can see. Here we got 200. Click on this. Here you can see status code is 200. And for this particular request, the status code is 204. So we send a request to google.com and it returns a response with status codes. 100 series, which is information. Status code 100, which means continue. This interim response indicate that the client should continue the request or ignore the response if the request is already finished. Status code 101, which is switching protocols. The requester has asked the server to switch the protocols and the server has agreed to do so. Status code 102 processing, which means the server has received and accepted the request which is sent by the browser, but has sent an interim response to the browser because server has not completed the request yet and the server is processing the request, but no response is available yet. Status code 103, which is early hints, used with link header to allow browser to start preloading the resources while server prepares a response. Status code 200, which is OK. The request is OK. This is the standard response for successful HTTP request. Status code 201, which is created. The request has been fulfilled and new resource is created. Status code 202, which is accepted. The request has been accepted for processing, but the processing has not been completed. Status code 203, which is non-authoritative information. This status code informs the user that request submitted to the server was successful, but the meta information collected from the third party or local copy instead of from the origin server. Status code 204, which is no content. The request has been successfully processed, but it is not returning any content. HTTP status code 205, which is reset content. This status code tells the user at the browser end to reset the content in the document that sent the request. We can consider the example of filling a form online. In case of error, the server asks the form to be cleared or reset so that information can be entered again. Status code 206, which is partial content. The server is delivering only part of the resource due to the range header sent by the client. Status code 207, which is multi-status. The 207 HTTP status code displays data and information from multiple resources in response to several operations and multiple HTTP status codes at once. Status code 208, which is already reported. Here you can see the description. Status code 226, which is I am used. The 226 status code means the server has completed the user request or GET request for the given resource. The response represents the results of one or multiple instance manipulations which is applied to the current instance. 300 series, which is nothing but redirection. HTTP status code 300, which is nothing but multiple choices. The request has more than one possible response. The user agent or user should choose one of them. Status code 301, which is moved permanently. The URL of the requested resource has been changed permanently. The new URL is given in the response. Status code 302, which is nothing but found. The requested page has moved temporarily to a new URL. Status code 303, which is nothing but see other. The requested page can be found under different URL. Status code 304, which is nothing but not modified. This status code is used for hashing purpose. This status code tells the client that the response has not been modified, so the client can continue to use the same hashed version of the response. Status code 307, which is nothing but temporary redirect. The server sends this response to direct the client to get the requested resource at another URI with the same method that was used in the prior request. This has the same semantic as 302 found HTTP response code, with the exception that the user agent must not change the HTTP method which was used. If a post method was used in the first request, then post method must be used in the second request. Status code 308, which is nothing but permanent redirect. This means the resource is now permanently located at another URI specified by the location HTTP response header. This has same semantic as 301 moved permanently HTTP response code, with the exception that the user agent must not change the HTTP method which was used. If a post method was used in the first request, then the post method must be used in the second request. 400 series, which is nothing but client error. Status code 400, which is nothing but bad request. The 400 status code indicate error at the client side or user side and let them know the server could not understand the request due to the bad syntax. Example spelling, punctuation, and other errors. Status code 401, which is nothing but unauthorized. This indicates the request sent by the browser could not be authenticated. The authentication may have been provided by the client, but the client is not permitted to access the requested resource. Status code 402, which is nothing but payment required. The 402 status code was created for directing the user to complete the digital payments. After the payment, the server was supposed to display the requested content. However, this status code is reserved for future use. Status code 403, which is nothing but forbidden. The server understood the request. However, it refuses to authorize it. This code is written when user attempt to access something that the user do not have permission to access. Status code 404, which is nothing but not found. The requested page could not be found, but it may be available again in the future. Status code 405, which is nothing but method not allowed. The requested method is not supported for the requested resource. For example, a get request on a form that requests data to be presented via post method, or put request on a read only resource. Status code 406, which is not acceptable. The requested resource is capable of generating only content which is not acceptable according to the accept headers sent in the request. Status code 407, which is nothing but proxy authentication required. This is similar to 401 unauthorized, but authentication should be done by a proxy. Status code 408, which is request timeout. The server timed out waiting for the request. Status code 409, which is conflict. This status code indicates the request could not be processed because of the conflict in the current state of the resource, such as an edit conflict between multiple simultaneous updates. Status code 410, which is nothing but gone. The requested page is no longer available. Status code 411, which is nothing but length required. The server rejected the request because the header field content length is not defined and the server requires it. The status code 412, which is nothing but precondition failed. The server does not meet one of the preconditions that the requester put on the request header fields. Status code 413, which is nothing but request too large. This status code indicates that the server refuses to process the user request because request payload is larger than the server can process. The server then closes the connection or generates retry after header field for the user. Status code 414, which is nothing but request URI too long. The server will not accept the request because URI is too long. This can occur when you convert post request to get request with long query information. Status code 415, which is nothing but unsupported media type. The server will not accept the request because the media type is not supported. Status code 416, which is nothing but range not satisfiable. The client has asked for the portion of the file, but the server cannot supply that portion. Status code 417, which is nothing but expectation failed. The server cannot meet the requirements of the expect request header field. Status code 418, which is nothing but I am a teapot. Status code 421, which is nothing but misdirected request. The request was directed at the server, but the server is not able to produce the response. For example, because of connection reuse. Status code 422, which is nothing but unprocessable entity. The request was well formed but was unable to be followed due to semantic errors. Status code 423, which is nothing but locked. The resource that is being accessed is locked. Status code 424, which is nothing but failed dependency. The request is failed because the request is dependent on another request and that request failed. Status code 425, which is nothing but too early. This status code indicates that the server is unwilling to risk processing a request because that might be replayed. Status code 426, which is nothing but upgrade required. The client should switch to different protocol such as TLS 1.3 given in the upgrade header field. Status code 428, which is nothing but precondition required. The origin server requires the request to be conditional, intended to prevent lost update problem, where client gets the resource state, modifies the state, and put it back to the server. Meanwhile, the third party has modified the state on the server, which leads to conflict. Status code 429, which is nothing but too many requests. The user has sent too many requests in the given amount of time, and this status code intended to use with rate limiting schemes. Status code 431, which is nothing but request header fields too large. The server is unwilling to process the request because either an individual header field or all the header fields collectively are too large. Status code 451, which is nothing but unavailable for legal reasons. The server operator has received legal demand to deny access to a resource or to a set of resources. That includes the requested resource. 500 series, which is nothing but server error. Status code 500, which is nothing but internal server error. The server has encountered the situation and the server does not know how to handle it. Status code 501, which is nothing but not implemented. The server either does not recognize the request method or lacks the ability to fulfill the request. Status code 502, which is nothing but bad gateway. The server was acting as a gateway or proxy and received an invalid response from the upstream server. Status code 503, which is nothing but service unavailable. The server is currently unavailable because of overloaded or it is down. Status code 504, which is nothing but gateway timeout. The server was acting as a gateway or proxy and it did not receive a timely response from the upstream server. Status code 505, which is nothing but HTTP version not supported. The server does not support the HTTP protocol version which is used in the request. Status code 506, which is nothing but variant also negotiates. The server has an internal configuration error. Status code 507, which is nothing but insufficient storage. This status code indicates to the users that the server cannot store the representation which is needed to complete the request and process the resource. Status code 508, which is nothing but loop detected. The server detected an infinite loop while processing the request. Status code 510, which is nothing but not extended. Further extensions to the request are required for server to fulfill it. Status code 511, which is nothing but network authentication required. The client needs to authenticate to gain the network access. You can get the Java source code link from the description section of the video. To see the description in mobile, click on this icon and it will expand like this. Then click on this more button to see the description. And in the description, you can see the links. And click on these links to get the Java source code.